Yeah, it is pretty surprising, but the scientific community has pretty much accepted the fact that science has discovered God. In fact, in the Morning Roofing, in the Guide for the Perplexed, Morning Roofing stories that published about 1190, unfortunately in Arabic. My Maimonides read it towards the end of his life. It was in Arabic, but that's the way it is. Not Aramaic, Arabic. But that was the lingua franca of the Jews in Athens at the time. Maimonides wrote that if you want to discover the essence of God, he said if you first should study Madat Teva, the science of nature. If you want to know Madat Elokut, the science of God. One of my books is called The Science of God, but I didn't realize that Nachmanides had used the exact same title. In fact, Barber chose the title, The Science of God. Then I was looking, I don't read Arabic, so I read it, a copy I heard from my father, blessed memory, the Friedlander edition in English. But then there are the notes on the bottom. And he talks about nature, he says down at the bottom, Madat Teva, and then Madat Elokut, the science of God. And there was the book, my second book, The Science of God. So it was only inadvertently that I stole the phrase from Maimonides. But if you're looking to try to understand God and to see whether there's confluence versus conflict, then you have to look deep inside both the Torah and the Teva. And we'll talk about this evening a few things, but first just the idea of science actually discovering God. And it's pretty much couched in this particular diagram, which if any of you have a smartphone or anything that can get to the web, you just go to the NASA site, National Space Authority, NASA, and then type in WMAP, the initials for this satellite, and you'll find this picture. It's even easier on Google Images. Just type in WMAP. Can you get this diagram? Now, what you're about to hear may surprise you, but I actually presented this to the United States Congress in the spring of this year, February. It's interesting, there's something called the National Prayer Breakfast. Obama gave the opening speech, and I gave the closing. When I got to my speech, he had already left. But nonetheless, it was kind of interesting that this kind of interest isn't just, in yeshivot or in the Jewish population. I mean, 3,000 people, each paying, I didn't get the money, but they each pay $750 for a good meal. I mean, you have to admit it. And it's totally irrelevant. But it's pretty amazing. If the people were having steak, Barbara and I, Barbara Sofer, great writer, got steak also, wrapped in so much cellophane, I'm not exaggerating. It was almost impossible to get the cellophane because you can't use their knives, and all my stuff is inside the cellophane. And I'm not exaggerating. It took me, a senator, and a member of the House of Representatives, they were opposing parties actually, it's absolutely true, to finally tear it apart. And that was for one of the dinners. It was breakfast and a dinner. This magnificent steak. So if you get invited to that, go. The kashrut is aleph. Anyway, science, this diagram is probably the strongest theological statement that science will ever be able to make about the universe. And it's straight cosmology. It has nothing to do with theology, except it's a totally theological statement. I don't think the person that presented this and drew this up realized it, but it is. What this is here is a diagram of the history of the universe. This is a timeline. This is the creation on this side, and it moves over till today. Each line is 1 billion years. If we have time, we can get into the age of the universe, but the more I just want to get the proof of God. The specks are galaxies. The black is nothing. The black's nothing, something which humans can't fit in their brain. No human can extrapolate from their thoughts space or time. We're stuck. We all think in the exact same box. There's a box because this is where our brain develops. You can't think out of this box. And that box is pretty much defined by time, space, and matter or energy. This would be the physical world. And we all think in that box. You can't extrapolate from your brain the concept of time or space. But the black on this diagram is nothing in the fullest sense of the meaning nothing. It's not empty space, it's nothing. It doesn't fit, we can say the word, but nothing is not a vacuum. Empty space is space. It's nothing. Science, if you ask the scientists what this would be, we would say we don't deal with that stuff. We deal with stuff inside the universe. The Bible would say it's God. And this would be the Makom, and we would be with him. That's one of the names for God is the Makom. So this is the creation. This expands over time. First the big burst, then the expansion. And gradually, what this diagram tells us is that there was one physical creation. Torah holds by that also. The Ramban, Nachmanides, and the Kubal, 3 times over in the opening 3 sentences of the Torah, says there was one physical creation. There was one physical creation. 3 times there's one physical. To get the point across, that everything is made from this burst of energy. Science holds by this with no equivocation. There was one physical creation, which is an amazing statement, because the Big Bang didn't produce chulent and chopped liver. The Big Bang produced energy in the physical part of it. And that energy became alive. That's a stretch in itself, but that's what this diagram says. But that's not yet God is what I'm looking for, because I want to see God actually in this picture. So if you look, I don't know if you can see these words, but this is the creating force. There's absolutely nothing. And the diagram shows that a force of nature, a quantum fluctuation, creates the universe from absolute nothing. The thought that there was a creation from nothing, if you ever were told that proves there's a God, it doesn't. The fact is, nature allows yesh ma'ayin, something from nothing. Not just God, nature. We may not hear it, but that's the reality. My background's in nuclear physics. Bachelor's, master's, PhD, all from MIT, 7 years in the physics staff, and I've actually seen E equals mc squared quite a few times in the nature of atomic bombs going off. So I would say the following: praying for peace might be lovely, but it's not adequate. You have to work for peace. Because the first bomb that I was present at was an underground explosion. It was in the States, and I made the mistake of standing on the top of the mountain. The bomb was under the mountain. Of course, after the explosion, there wasn't much of the mountain left. Luckily, I was left. But we had to run for our, whatever we had to run for. But we had, anyway, it's quite. The yield of an atomic bomb is a lot of science and also a lot of art. The yield, how much energy you're going to get from the bang. Anyway, so we have here a statement which is pretty amazing. There's absolute nothing, and then from this absolute nothing, something, a part of nature called a quantum fluctuation, creates the universe from absolute nothing. Now that was floated first about 1973 by Professor Ed Tryon, professor of physics, and he published it in one of the 2 leading peer-reviewed journals in the world, the journal Nature. And when I say peer-reviewed, everyone knows what I mean. If you don't know, please raise your hand so I'll make it clear. There's no point in saying anything. Peer-reviewed means if you do an experiment, okay, and you want to publish it. So you got to publish things. You want to get tenure. You got to publish things if you want to get your wife to give you a hug when you come home. You should look at this. Here, I did this. So you write up the experiment and you know the results, etc. Then you send it to a journal. If you're lucky, you send it, and it's really good. You send it to something like Nature. But you have to be really good for that. Or in the States, Science. Back at MIT, because you can get text so much of my work is in science in the journal called Science. There are 2 pillars of peer-reviewed journals. So the journal gets your article, takes off your name, and then sends it to your colleagues, your peers, your equals. And they look at it and they say, oh, what a stupid thing this is. No, they say, well, it's very great. Now, if they're nice guys, I'm not trying to steal the idea from you. You know, if they're not nice guys, they'll say, this is terrible, don't publish it, and then they'll write it up and send it off themselves. But if they're nice guys, that usually doesn't happen. You know, they'll say it's either good or bad, and then it gets published. Nature is one of the 2 leading peer-reviewed journals. And when Ed Tryon published this in the journal Nature, 40 years ago, actually, no one paid much attention to him. But he worked out the physics, and now it's the accepted phenomenon. You can get something from nothing, provided you have the laws of nature. Now that kind of gets dicey. See, for the quantum, this is called a quantum fluctuation. So I leave the fancy words out, just call it an aspect of the laws of nature. So what do you think? If the laws of nature create the universe from absolute nothing, must do the laws of nature predate the universe? That's not a rhetorical one?
Yeah.
Obviously, right? If they make it, they must be out there. Now, our concept of time begins with the universe. So that means the laws of nature are outside of time. Now, what do you think? Are the laws of nature physical, or the laws of nature act on the physical? So they're not physical. They act on the physical. You see what we're getting here? We have a set of forces, or a force, outside of time, not physical, creates the universe from absolute nothing. That just starts to sound familiar. Not physical, not bounded by time, creates the universe from absolute nothing. Gosh, what does that sound like? And it is God. It is the biblical definition of God. And there are a host of yes?
Why can't you say that it was some sort of universe before this, that this wasn't the first universe, whatever, however you want that?
Well, there are no data that support that. That's an argument, but that wouldn't solve the problem also. You still have the beginning of our universe. This is the beginning of the gazillion other universes. Our universe, the description of the creation of our universe, is an exact description of the biblical God, almost, like 80%. The fact that there might be other universes for which there are no data whatsoever. You realize about 20 years before you were born, that wasn't even thought about because they thought there was another way of getting around creation. And that was, the universe is so massive, maybe, that massive means a lot of gravity. So as the universe expands, well, this galaxy is generating gravity, which is pulling on this galaxy, okay? And it's going out, and it's slow and slow because the gravity acts over great distances. Slow it down, and then it'll come back and go back again. Now that was the great hope, that would way of beating creation, because you want to, God forbid, you really want to beat creation. God, creation sounds like what? The creator. Great. Just think of what a heartbreak that would be for a secular person. So the oscillating universe, then it was discovered to a great embarrassment that there wasn't enough mass to make the universe collapse. Not only does the universe look like it's not collapsing, the rate of expansion is actually increasing. That's pretty surprising because it means there's a force in the world of which we don't have a clue as to what this force is. But there's a lot of things we don't have a clue about. But this is not a misprint of the diagram. It's going out like a horn. It's really, I think anyone who is interested in how the universe is put together, how they got into the universe, it's worth downloading this. This piece of paper is 5 years old. It's exactly the same today. It hasn't changed one little bit. These data are this is the condensed understanding of your history and the history of the table, the history of the floor you're standing on, the history of the entire universe, brought by the scientific community. So we have a force that's outside of time, that creates the universe from absolute nothing, that is not physical. That's God. And an entire host of scientists will tell you, if you want to call that God, call it God. But would it be the God of the Bible? That's the question. That description is like 80% of the God of the Bible. But the other 20% or the 30% or the other 50% is the biblical understanding of the God of the Bible is also interested in how the universe works. The deist God, the God of science, I'm not exaggerating. Name me some of the I don't know if you know their names, any of the major skeptic scientists, like Richard Dawkins, Stephen Hawking, all the same. Want to call that God? Call it God. But it wouldn't, but the statement then go on, but it wouldn't be a God to whom we could always pray, but it wouldn't be a God that would be interested in your prayers, okay? So that's the difference. But so anyway, so it would be what's called a deist God. God sets the world in motion, winds it up, run baby, run, steps back and goes to his lunch. Takes a nap. Yes?
I don't pretend to have read the book, but wasn't there some kind of commotion that Stephen Hawking's last book seemed to be that he could present a universe without God?
Oh, the grand design. Go to my website, or go to h.com also. They're both in both places. h.com is more easy. Go to Stephen Hawking and God. That book, even by the journal Scientific American, which is avidly anti-metaphysical, it is so actively anti anything spiritual that every month it pays. Scientific American, is the most widely read science journal in the world. It's not peer reviewed. Probably by a factor of 10, maybe of 100. It's just worldwide, but it has an agenda. The agenda is science, and the agenda is a material world. It's so material that they have a paid column every month by Mike Schwimmer, Jewish leader, say, head and founder of the World Skeptic Society, who writes a column every month to show anything metaphysical is ridiculous. So I'm just positioning the journal. They panned The Grand Design, Stephen Hawking's book. The book never would have been published if it didn't have his name on it. It's patently ridiculous. For Scientific American to make a statement along those lines is pretty amazing, because they favor the view of a grand design, meaning you have a bunch of universes. It's the multi-universe theory, the M theory, that there's a vast number of universes, and that's the reality. In fact, if you do have a vast number of universes, then the fact that our universe looks literally like it's designed for life, because it is, but whether it's designed for life, it's made for life. The nature of our universe is so perfect, the laws of nature are so exact, that it doesn't seem you could possibly get it in one roll of the dice. So what does that call for? It calls for an example, by Scientific American a few years ago, or the Grand Design a year ago, infinite Earths in parallel universes really exist. That's what you were saying. What's your name?
Kenny Goodman.
Kenny? Okay, that's,
Is there any evidence for that?
Well, that's what I'm going to get to. Oh, yes, you're going to hear it right now. But you've already bought the magazine, okay? Remember, tens and tens, maybe hundreds, tens of thousands of people read this every month in many, many languages. I mean, thank God my book's in 10 languages, but that pales compared to probably 70 languages that this appears in. But there's no question here. Infinite Earths in parallel universes really exist. Now, how do we know that? It's almost embarrassing to read it. If you go to my website, and I can also, or the H.com website, look at Stephen Hawking and God, I discuss this. It's embarrassing as a scientist to see that this would be published. Here is their proof. Big diagram, but also the text. But here they make it, you can't miss it. Cosmologists infer the presence of these parallel universes. Now notice, infer really exists, but now it's infer. They infer the existence of these level 2 parallel universes by scrutinizing the properties of our universe. These properties including, and then they list the laws of nature, and they plot them, and they show only where these overlap could you possibly have life, and they do overlap at that point. So they list this, they show that. These forces of nature and the number of variables, etc. Now here comes. Were established by random processes during the birth of our universe. Yet they have exactly the values that sustain life. That suggests the existence of other universes with other values that don't sustain life. Really?
Doesn't suggest it to me.
Exactly. Isn't it? It's madness, right? It's such maddening logic. But you know, the average bloke on the street that doesn't know how to think rationally, think rigorously, and he reads it in this, well, that proves it. There must be other universes, not universes. That's the whole problem. But what Scientific American has in blundered said, if we are the only universe, we're a designer universe. Because you can't get this, it is illogical that on one roll of the cosmic dice, by random reactions, we will get how all the laws of nature, I mean, just as a simple example, time only flows in one direction. You take it for granted. But you can write 1,000 equations that show time flowing in a dozen different directions, but it only flows forward. That's pretty important. There's only 3 dimensions. Supposedly we're in 2 dimensions. Supposedly we're in 2 dimensions. Well, let's see what, I don't know if I can draw it, but let's see, I think I put it in everything. Let's see what an animal would look like in 2 dimensions. So here we go, got a little tail back here, then we go with the animal, then we go here, and now he's got a mouth, right? But it's only 2 dimensions. And there's the, oops, that's the backside. But you see, the problem with 2 dimensions is the food has to go through him and go out. You notice the problem here? The top is divided from the bottom. That's why you want 3 dimensions. Okay? So there's a bunch of things that are much more subtle than that. The fact is, the universe is made for life. And if we are the only universe, then you got a problem. And that's why the oscillating universe got rid of the problem in theory, but it doesn't really. Because in each oscillation, the laws of nature might change. Give enough trials, you can get one that works. Or you have a bunch of universes, well, most of them be losers for life. But 1 or 2 might work, and we're obviously in the 1 or 2 that work. That's why, because by definition, that's how it works. So what's the problem? So to try to understand whether this deist God is really a deist God, or is it the God of the Bible? Because the God of the Bible is a deist God, plus the fact that it's not deist, it's also interested in the universe. Deist means God runs up the universe, sets up the universe, puts in the laws of nature, and lets it run. You know, never touches it. But the Bible doesn't hold by that. It holds by all these definitions here, but not the deist part. It holds by the fact that God is interested in the universe. So Moses, in the closing chapters of Deuteronomy, Dvarim, in chapter 32, verse 7, Moses gives the clue as to how to determine whether this creator God, this God of science essentially, is also interested in the universe. He's, in chapter 32, verse 7, Zechor Yemot Olam, Bino Shirot Dor V'Dor. So Moses breaks the calendar into two parts for the evidence of God. Zechor Yemot Olam, look at the days, remember the days of old. And the Ramban says the Sheshet Mei Bereshit, the 6 days of Genesis, that a burst of energy can become alive. And that's a stretch for anyone, even for Scientific American it's a stretch. How do light beams become alive? But that's what this diagram says. Now, if you read books by, let's say, the famous Richard Dawkins, The God Delusion, one of the avid anti-God person, I mean, he calls it the God Delusion, and I mean, he's just certain there's no such thing as any intervention. So how does he account for the fact of rocks and water becoming alive? Of course, 4.5 or so, about 4 billion years ago, rocks and water became alive. Life starts on this earth. So he answers that in a 4-letter word. Look. That's all he can say. Life became alive. How? Rocks and water became alive. Well, and he brushes over it. The book's quite a long book. When he gets to that point, he gives one sentence to the origin of life, like his Slovsik. And if you hear books on tape, because my wife got me, not your board for my son, books on tape, and you get the book on tape, then his wife actually reads this part, and says, that was a stroke of luck. That origin of life is given approximately 20 seconds, maybe 10 seconds. And then they just go on how life could develop. There's not a clue in the world. In fact, even persons like Feynman, persons who tout themselves as being totally secular, will say explicitly, if anyone tells you that they have a clue as how life started, they either are naive or they're liars. They're either naive or a knave. Because no one has any idea how life started. Is that correct? Oh, I thought you might be checking it.
What?
I thought you might be checking.
I was looking at the rest of the pasuk also.
What?
I was looking at the rest of it also.
So Zechor Yemot Olam is, according to Ramban, this phenomena of this energy, through what kind of reactions could finally become alive. We are this line out here. That's us. We are here. And what this diagram says is in this flow, we go from essentially nothing to energy to life itself. So that's this. So a lot of people say that could happen by chance. A lot of people say it couldn't happen by chance. So that's the Zechor Yemot Olam. Then Moses breaks the other half of the calendar. Bino Chinot Dor V'Dor. Bino Chinot Dor V'Dor. Remember the flow of social history. The flow of social history is a little different. No one questions that bizarre nature. I think the clearest way that you could say it is, could be maybe 10 years ago. I was sitting with a Nobel laureate, Leon Lederman, not the T, the D, Lederman, the physicist Lederman. And we were sitting in the what is now the Imbal Hotel, those days they called it the Rome, in Jerusalem, and we're talking science. And finally, we get to have to end the meeting and say, but before we finish this, he's a Nobel laureate and physicist. What about spirituality? He says, leave me out of that. You want to talk about that, go back to the yeshiva. But then he continued without a break. He said, but I do find something spooky about the people of Israel coming back to the land of Israel. See, that's kind of interesting. Leon Lederman found nothing spooky about the Eskimos eating fish up in Alaska, or the Italians eating pizza in Rome. But he found something real spooky that Jews are eating pizza and falafel in Rehov Yafo after 2,000 years of schlepping around the world. Spooky means it doesn't follow natural law. That's exactly what Moses says. There's a marker in this world, and God says it point blank also. God, also in chapter 32, verse 26 and verse 27. In fact, you can find, you have it there.
Sure.
I mean, that's really a shocker. I mean, it's a great put down. The Torah ends in chapter 34 of Deuteronomy. This is chapter 32, 2/3 of the way through the chapter. It's almost the end of the Bible. And God is about to tell us what God thinks of us. And also tell us why we are the marker in this world. Because Jews are the marker, for better or for worse. There are lousy Jews, and there are good Jews. Madoff was a lousy, stinking Jew. He ruined hundreds of thousands of people's lives, and he's a lousy bastard. That's just the reality. And he sits in jail, probably minimum security, salad bar for lunch and ping pong in the afternoon, but he's ruined hundreds of thousands of people, and the world knows that he's a Jew. On the other hand, there are great Jews, like of the 8 Nobel laureates in the sciences this year, 6 were Jews, and 5 of them did the work in Israel, including the famous Higgs particle, the God particle. Mm-hmm. I don't think anyone, I certainly didn't know until it came out, that half the prize would be devoted to an Israeli Jew, a Holocaust survivor, and the other, Peter Higgs, in Scotland. Can you read verse 26 there? What does it say?
You said 32:26?
32:26, yeah.
32:26. Amarti af ehem ashbisa me'enosh zichram.
Keep going.
Uleka as oyev agor pen yina kiru tsaremo pen yamaru yedenu rama velo Hashem pa'al kozos.
You see what's happening here? God says, you're such a bunch of nudniks. God's talking to us. This is chapter 2/3 through chapter 32. The Bible ends in chapter 34, and God is telling us, you're such a bunch of nudniks. I would have destroyed you, but God couldn't. Why? Pen, lest the nations say it was by their hand. You see the problem here? God has backed God's into a corner. It may sound like it's heresy, but that's the reality. God says it right there. I would have wiped you out. I would have, wiped you off the world. But I didn't. I couldn't. Or I could. But the nations would say it was by their hand that it was done, and not me letting it get done. What does God care about the nations? God cares a lot about the nations. We're the marker to teach the nations. But notice that God then essentially backs down and said, I couldn't do it, because the nations would say, that they did it. I think David Hartman said it perfectly. The perfect example of what that sentence is, and we see it also in this week's portion. Why is Isaac blessed? He says, because Abraham did this, that, and the other thing, okay? Rabbi Hartman says the following. God fell in love with Abraham and got stuck with his grandchildren. That's exactly what happened. It says it point blank right there. I would have wiped you out. You don't deserve to survive, but I can't do it because the nations would say that it's by their hand. The nations would deny that it was God. And we're the marker in this world. And we show up consistently. And even the persons like Richard Dawkins, the God delusion, and the others will say, that doesn't make sense. They'll say, okay, light beams have become alive, give yourself a few billion years, this, that, and the other thing. That could happen. But as far as the Jews, there's no explanation. Even the major atheists tell us that, in fact, it's bizarre. I'm going to read 2 things, and I just spend a tiny bit of time maybe on something like the age of the universe or something, like a dinosaur fossil with me and stuff like that. But what would be some of the examples, classic examples, of God acting in this world in a way, because if God's a deity, if we could say, well, the Jews stand out and it doesn't make sense. Well, the noble people, like the state of Israel, we got all these Nobel laureates, we got, after there was what's called before not before everyone, before, all these students here, China had something called the Cultural Revolution. In Chinese, it sounds like the cultural destruction, I was told by my translators. The Cultural Revolution. So in the Cultural Revolution, China essentially destroyed its intellectual class. In the sciences, in the philosophies, in the humanities. The science is what they were really concerned about, because they say the world's zooming ahead. So China had to bring in foreign experts. They did this through the UN. China didn't have the money to pay, so the UN was paying it. So they brought it through the United Nations. They picked the persons that they thought, whether they were right or wrong, experts, to bring them in. Guess what country the first advisor to the Ministry of Development, in other words, developing in China, what country they chose? I mean, it's obvious. Israel. Israel wasn't about to have relations with China for another 10 years. But they turned to Israel for the first advisor, not cultural, science advisor, was me. I was the first one. They said, and I got out off the plane. They said, you came in under the radar. You're an Israeli. All the publications they want from me were based in Israel. And he said, you're an Israeli. You came in under the radar here. We're going to tell you here 2 points. Don't ask any questions, because you're here, as a person from a country you don't recognize. And the second was, we're going to ask you questions, just answer them. Okay, that might seem limiting, but it was such a plumb of it was phenomenal. Now China's like Hong Kong, but then China was just amazing. Go back to 1980, 81. That wasn't the dark ages, but ask your grandparents, they really was the country at the time. But it was kind of interesting. Why would, I think your friend is locked out. why would China turn to Israel? Because even the Chinese know Jews is news. You know, it doesn't make sense. So just two examples of what I would say would be absolute markers. Then just a tiny bit on evolution, a tiny bit on the ancient universe, and then we can all do what we want to do. Okay, so I want to see if I can find these things here, right? The one would be, now I have a problem because I made the mistake of refiling my notes, which, as anyone knows, is like the kiss of death for finding anything. Okay, let's see. That's here. I'm going on with the things. These are two documented phenomena that I think tend to show God's hand in the world, although you can't, it's difficult, you can never really prove these things as God's hand being in the world. You know, you can just say, this is what happened, and you know, if you were standing on a mountain, John Polkinghorne uses it, if you were standing on a mountain, and you saw in the distance a bunch of ragtag people running, right, like, you know, a couple of million running through a desert, and there's a water barrier in front of them called the Yam Suf. And then in the background, further back with binoculars, you see chariots coming after them. And then suddenly they get to the water, and a wind comes up and opens the water opens up, and they go through, and the water comes back and wipes out the enemy. You can't prove that's God. What did you see? You see a wind, these lucky guys got out, and that's it. In other words, nature sometimes hides the face of God. So, two thoughts. One was in the first Gulf War. Unfortunately, the first encounter in the first Gulf War, 1991. Israel wasn't even part of the war, but you know, the Iraqis were busy sending Scud missiles our way. Okay, for no reason except they hate Israel. Now, the Scud 39 missiles landed in the most densely populated part of Israel, Cholon. That's where, you know, it's house by house. It's not like we have space between, like here. 39 missiles landed. One person was killed by a direct hit. Now that was surprising because, and it's terrible that anyone should get killed, but that only one was killed was surprising because the kill rate of these missiles was known. Because before the Gulf War, there was the War of the Cities. Iran and Iraq were trying to kill each other. One's Persian and one's Arabic. You know, they're both Muslims. But Iran is Persian, they're not Arabs, and Iraq is Arab. So they're shooting these missiles at each other. And they were using the same missiles, the Scuds. So the kill rate was known, how they, in this type of, these buildings, etc., this density, this population density. So it was surprising, thank God, that when the journal Nature, again, this one of these leading peer-reviewed journals, you fight to get into a publication there. They devoted 2 articles to the question, why were Scud casualties so low? They couldn't figure out, and then they document some of the things that happened. One landed in a school, but everyone was home. Another landed in a field between 2 buildings. Another landed, these are all documented in the secular papers. Another went in Cholon, penetrated 3 floors, and landed without exploding on the desk of the shop. It was a jewelry shop. Maybe somebody from around that time saw the picture. There's this missile, nose resting at the table, penetrated 3 cement floors to get down. It was a jewelry shop. The place through the window was a shambles, but the door and the window, the outside, were still in shape. And they were not broken because there's no explosion. The roof had collapsed down. So the sappers didn't want to smash in. Who knows? Any sound might, you know, send the whole thing off. So they called up the owner of the jewelry shop, and he opened the door for them. And there was the missile. You can get this in a picture from the secular papers. There was the missile, not quite touching the table, because the nose of the missile was resting on, what would you guess? What would you guess?
Tanakh.
What?
Tanakh.
Yeah. Now, it wasn't that softened the blow. It had pushed its way through 3 floors already. But it was resting on Tanakh. The owner was, you know, it's not many Jews and shops that maybe owned by really, at least the ones I know, are you know, observant Jews. It was resting on Tanakh. I don't know. I don't think it proves it's a God. But sometimes these anecdotal things happen. So they did a study of how they bring these things here, point after point, And finally, they can't figure out, because the number, God forbid, that should have been killed was vastly larger than the one person. So they attribute the fact that only one person was killed to luck. Now you will search since the first publication of this journal until now, and you will never, ever, except for this time, attribute luck as the reason for the outcome of an experiment. But there's no way of describing it. You can't explain it. The point is there are these markers in the world, and people realize there are markers in the world, and they want to observe it or not. But Jews, we are the marker. That's as simple as that. We stand out. One other example, then I want to get to something more scientific. But in 1981, we destroyed the nuclear reactor in Iraq. On the spot, America introduced 2 resolutions of condemnation of the United Nations. America, condemnation. You should know that in the first Gulf War, now they don't have the reactors. The first or the second, which of the Gulf Wars, the head of the military of the United States, whatever level, ministers, whatever they're called, the head of the army, sent a satellite photograph of the destroyed reactor with a thank you note to our head of the military here. Remember, when it first happened, they condemned us. But anyway, we destroyed that reactor, and it was a pretty amazing, because you have to get to the reactor to destroy it. By jet, it's an hour and 40-minute flight. So it's very interesting how this happens. Our planes left from our base in the Negev, and they fly south to Aqaba Eilat, in the tip of the Red Sea, and then they head east along the border of Syria and Jordan. Now they flew along the border.
Saudi Arabia.
What?
Jordan and Saudi Arabia.
What did I say?
You said Syria. But
Oh yeah, no, it's ridiculous. Yeah, Saudi. I beg your pardon. Yeah, Jordan and Saudi Arabia. And now we want to destroy the reactor. Well, we have the ordnance. The bombs are on the outside because they each are one-ton bombs. You have 2 one-ton bombs with delayed fuses on them, and then pods on the wing for the extra fuel to get up into the air. That America had sold us these F-16s without the ability to refuel in air, because they wanted them for defense, and they didn't want any of the Arabs saying we're doing for offense or us to do offense. But Jews figured out how to do it. But it took place in June, and it's real hot in June. I mean, it's hot here, but Jordan is really hot. At least we got to see Jordan is like Amman. So the king of Jordan, Hussein, doesn't like to hang around in Amman. He goes to Aqaba Eilat and sits on his yacht. Why not? You're the king. So King Hussein of Jordan is down in Eilat, Aqaba, sitting on his yacht, and he sees these 8 F-16s come straight down and turn east. They came straight south over Israel, and they turned east over the border between Jordan and Saudi Arabia. Well, he sees all these bombs, the ordnance, the bombs, because they're outside these fighters, and then he sees also 8 F-15s accompanying them. So what does he think they're going to do? To blow up the reactor. It's all archived. You can find this stuff in the archives. So what does he do immediately? He phones his office in Amman, tell them to immediately notify the king of Saudi Arabia that the Israelis are coming to bomb the reactor. Well, what happens? The telephone message is lost in the transmission. Now the planes are coming to do the bombing of the reactor. It's not Saudi. It's Iraq. The planes are coming to bomb the Iraq. It's an hour and 40-minute flight. They're even visible approximately 20 to 30 minutes out because it's flat there. Now the Iraqis have a radar-mounted missiles, radar-directed missiles, and that's very important because you can't, if you're using an active missile as opposed to just a ballistic missile, which once you shoot it just goes where you send it to. But you want missiles that can move around, so they have to be guided. You can't guide that by your eyes. You have to do the calculation. The radar does the calculation. The plane's over here, but it's coming like that. It calculates the speed, sends the missile over here. So if it's going to happen, you don't want to shoot the missile over there because the plane's going to be over there. The radar is active for 20 minutes flying time away from the reactor. 30 minutes before the planes enter their that area zone with the 30 minutes out, the soldiers in charge of the radar look at their watches and realize it's time for the afternoon meal. They turn off the radar. You got to read this in the archives. You can look it up. And they go to have lunch. Our planes bomb the reactor, fly back. No one locks. Everyone's having lunch. It's an afternoon meal. It's not lunch. It's in the afternoon. The afternoon meal. They turned off the radar. It's impossible to believe it. After a while, good God, give us a little, maybe a little slack so we can doubt you. And they fly back. And here's the summary by the leader. And you have to listen to his words, please do. All 16 bombs, because there are 8 planes, each had 2 bombs. All 16 bombs hit dead on. He says with pride. In the 90-minute flight back, no one tried to intercept us. Now here's a closing statement. Everything went as well as we could have planned it. If I were religious, I would tell you it was the hand of God. If I were religious, I would tell you it's the hand of God. Interestingly, on the flight back, if you look up in the archives, one of the pilots read from Joshua. Hashemish b'givon dom v'yireich b'emek ayalon. My opinion is there are no non-religious Jews in Israel living here. None. Some keep Shabbos, some bomb reactors. But I don't think living in Israel is such a high level of mitzvah. I mean, any Jew's got enough brains, he can go work in Australia and have an easier life. So that's my take on this. But I want to get into some of the things that, yes, please.
Allow me just 30 seconds. The only trouble I have theologically with that type of road is, I'll give you an example. In 1940, Hitler, when he planned an invasion of France, so at the time, most of his generals thought he was insane. In fact, they were fearful of him, but they thought it was the craziest plan ever. There were a couple of Rommel and a couple others went along with it. For the most part, they said suicidal. The reasons why were the British and French army had about a 5-to-1 ratio of troops. Armor was about 10-to-1. Air Force, the German Air Force was very tiny at the time, so there's no possibility you could win. And through a series of incredible blunders and, just like what you read, crazy events that took place, Hitler invaded and probably won. At that time, was considered one of the most stupendous military victories of all time. Why am I bringing that up? If he had not won that battle, there probably not would have been a Holocaust. So my question is that, would you therefore say that God's hand was involved in Hitler having this miracle and therefore cast the causal chain cascading to the eventual Holocaust? I mean, are we supposed to take that as a theological message?
By the way, Rommel, was executed by the Germans.
Well,
he tried to kill Hitler.
Right, but also he was also injured. The reason why he ended up becoming executed is because he was severely injured by a stray bomb, and at that time it's questionable how much he was involved in the plot. But yes, he was eventually.
He took poison. He had a choice of being executed or taking poison. He took poison, so they wouldn't have to have a trial.
But my question is
on the Holocaust, I would say that God stepped back and let it happen. It happened. So either God made it happen or let it happen. I don't see anything in between. Either God made it happen or God let it happen. Either God made the temple be destroyed or God let the temple be destroyed. Over 1 million people died in that, and that was a Holocaust also. Over 1 million, even the secular estimates, over 1 million people died in the destruction of the Second Temple. So what would I say? God stepped back and let it happen. And those. I'm not willing to say that God wanted the Holocaust, but there are these flukes of nature. I don't have an answer. Maybe you may be right. Perhaps maybe it's not a good example, but it does sound strange that they went to have lunch just before we got there. So maybe God stepped back, and then something could have happened by the people of the world to stop it at that time. Those flukes that allowed Hitler to become so powerful. And maybe the fact is, God says, you want to run the world, you run the world that way. It wasn't only Jews that died. 80 million people died in that century. 80 million. Hitler killed about 30 million. I mean Hitler, Stalin. So, okay, yeah. I don't have an answer. So what's your answer?
I'm not going to posit that theological direction. I'm saying, I get concerned sometimes. Well, for instance, I understand the impact of the Scud thing, but one thing I get concerned about is that, what we consider to be the immediate benefit, we can't ultimately know along the causal chain. It's possible the bombing of the Iraqi reactor could turn out later on to have been a huge blunder. We don't know. Sometimes we don't. I'll give you an example. The Gemara tells us that by that what we know, one of the 5 things we mourn for on Tisha B'Av, one of them is what the Meraglim, the Chet Meraglim, the punishment was given down. The question is, what does that do with the Beis HaMikdash? Everything about Tisha B'Av is about the Beis HaMikdash, about the temple being destroyed. We include this event that happened in the Midbar. But it's possible to say that there was no one would have thought of it at the time, but had the generation that exited Egypt entered Israel, it's possible there would have been a destruction of the temple. Which means that sin there, the causal chain would have led to all the way to the destruction of Beis HaMikdash, which is a very long chain. You never would have contemplated that at that period of time. So I'm saying similar here. It could be the Scud thing, it could be, or it could not be. We don't know. And it could be that we think it's good, and it turns out that we were wrong all along insofar as it's being good. In other words, without a prophet or some sort of clear divine, Kriyas Yamsuf or Har Sinai event, I just find it's difficult to know 100% certainty that there was some divine intervention.
Okay, and you take it, going out of Egypt, the Hamush, 80% of the Jews died in Egypt. So so most of them, it looks like there's always something bad going on. It's
right.
Okay, so let's just going to move into something else now, and I want to have just a couple of sentences. Well, that's pretty much what I have to say about there being evidence for God in this idea that science has discovered God. The description of is exactly a deist God, but a deist God that follows the description of the biblical God. And then if you put in God active in this universe, which seems to be the case, although sometimes we can't figure out how God is active. So that would change the deist God into the biblical God totally. But the creation of the universe and the whole first part of that diagram is essentially straight out of the Bible. It's just exactly how we understand the universe. So then, if you don't mind, I'd like to talk. Yes.
So you would say that God created the universe at the beginning, but then He stepped back, or He has to be constantly? The scientific understanding of when you say if you want to call that God, call it God. Okay, right. Would be that then God steps back and God wound up the universe, put the laws of nature, gave it the energy of the Big Bang, and let it run. That would be the scientific. I would say there's a step after that. It's not that God steps back. God is interested in the universe. How God is interested in the universe is not so obvious. So it wouldn't be just a science understanding of God. Right, you would say God sustains the universe. You would say God at least doesn't have to sustain the universe.
I would say God is active in the universe all the time. It's a sustain. Who knows what it means by sustain?
Say constantly.
Yeah, I understand that, but we have no idea really what we think. What does it mean? What does it mean? We're here, so God is active in the universe all the time. If God wanted to, and if the biblical understanding is if God wanted to end the universe, God can create the universe. God can make it just disappear.
Does He have to make it disappear or stop making it?
Well, that's just be the same thing. If the making it is what makes it not disappear. God being active in the universe is what makes the universe not disappear. The Ramban, however, divides this whole approach. It's the Ramban on Genesis chapter 18, verse 19, where God says, "Because I've known Abraham, I'm going to tell him what I'm going to do." And there's a whole very long discussion. It's extremely interesting about why God has to tell us that God knows Abraham. Doesn't God know everyone? There's a whole. I don't want to get into a whole discussion there, but it's real interesting. And you can read it, preferably in the Hebrew, not in an English translation. And the Hebrew notes are extraordinary of God, how God interacts in the world. But the fact is, God is present. That's the whole difference between the scientific understanding and the biblical understanding. What changes a burst of energy into light is pretty hard to understand. Into life is pretty hard to understand, but that's what happened. And the scientific community would say it happened by chance. And it's hard to understand how that can happen by chance. There are no data that support it. So I'd like to get into evolution and just a little bit to talk about what it means. Yes?
If the burst of energy wouldn't have turned into life, then we wouldn't be here to say that it wasn't a God or anything. So obviously that doesn't prove anything. Only because it turned into life are we here discussing that it turned into life.
And?
So why is it so amazing that it turned into life?
Why it turns into life? Because it happened. The fact that it happened doesn't make it less amazing.
But if there was a probability, let's say even 10 to the trillion, right? if that was only chance, then even every other probability, if it doesn't happen, then we're not here discussing it.
Exactly.
But because there is that 1 in a trillion, then we are discussing it.
Exactly.
And I'm saying, why is that so crazy?
Because physics says when it's more than one chance, about 10 to the 8th or 9th, it never happens. And it happened. And it happened. So it's surprising that it happened. It's surprising that it happened. It is true that if we weren't here, we couldn't discuss it. But we are here. That's why it makes it so amazing to be able to discuss. The fact is, it did happen. And it probably happened in the only universe that exists. Certainly, we have no evidence of other universes. So it's surprising that light beams become cognizant. I mean, that's the only physical creation. Dak ma'od ein bo mamash. That's how Nachmanides, the Ramban, describes the first creation. Something so thin that had no essence to it. And it became cognizant. Thought. Became feeling love, boredom, wonder. How do light beams have the chutzpah to feel love? But that's what that diagram says. That's what the science diagram says. So it's unlikely that it would happen by chance. It's very unlikely. But it did happen. And if it hadn't happened, we wouldn't be here, but then there'd be nothing to talk about later, because there'd be no talking. But it did happen, and we can't talk about it.
And no other creatures discuss it but us.
And that's what we think. I mean, certainly that seems to be the evidence.
To the best of our knowledge.
Yeah, to the best of our knowledge, we're the most complex of everything. That's one of the problems that humans have. You might say, we're the top banana. There's nothing higher than us. So we think we can understand everything. Just try to understand an edge with an inside and no outside. You can't. Let alone space and time, etc. This whole thing, whole realms of what might be existence that we can't even conceive, because we're limited to that box, time, space, and matter. That's all we can think in.
Do you think other dimensions do this?
Do other dimensions exist?
Yeah.
If they don't, your cell phone would stop working, and everything else, and this computer would stop working, this camera would stop. It's all course. Quantum physics demands there be other. The fact that we only can access 4 dimensions certainly doesn't mean that there are only 4 dimensions. It means that we access 4 dimensions, time, space, and matter. So the length, width, height, and time. That's all we can access. We can't access anything out of that. But if they don't exist, we have to rewrite physics, literally from the ground up. Only Newtonian physics will work, but Newtonian physics doesn't explain the fact that the clocks at the top of the World Trade Center were actually going at a rate differently than the clocks at the bottom. It was an ongoing experiment until our cousins decided that destruction is better than creation. Why would they make the difference that these clocks up here would go at a rate differently than these down here? Einstein told the reason why. That's why the clocks were there, to make that experiment. It was an ongoing experiment. It doesn't make sense that time goes at a rate differently on the moon than it goes on the Earth. But it does. There's no question about it, because it's measured. It goes differently on the sun than on the Earth. Not a question, it's measured by the radiation, the wavelengths of light. Why should time is time? That was the one mistake Isaac Newton made in his Principia Mathematica. He said, it's beautiful, time stands pristine, unaffected by events. Lovely statement, but totally wrong. Everything else is fine, but that's wrong. Time is part of, why should the passage, the clicking of a clock, differ from one place to another? The universe is illogical. It's illogical. If anything illogical, if the physics of the world today is totally illogical. Quantum physics wasn't developed by deduction. Quantum physics was developed by observation. Even the laws of relativity were not developed by deduction, because they are totally based on something that can only be shown by observation, that is, the speed of light is constant, no matter how you measure it. Once you have that constant, then you can deduce the laws of relativity. But they're totally based on the observation by Michelson and Morley in the late 1890s, that the speed of light is always constant, doesn't matter how you measure it, whether the light beam is moving towards you, away from the light source, whatever. It's totally illogical. If I'm running towards a light beam and I got a meter to show how fast the light beam's hitting my meter, and I'm running towards it, light beam's coming towards me, the speed that it hits my meter should be this speed plus my speed. Just like the catcher. The pitcher throws the ball at 90 miles an hour, a fast pitch, 90 miles. The catcher sees the man at first running to second. He whips off his mask, runs forward, catches the ball. What speed does the ball hit his mitt? 90 miles plus whatever he's running at, 30 miles, 120 miles an hour. But that's how it's like. If the pitcher, instead of pitching the ball, had flashed a picture of a ball, okay? And it's coming at the speed of light. And the catcher's a superstar, and he rips off his mat, and he runs at half the speed of light, okay? 0.5. And it's coming at 1 speed of light. So you think 1 plus half, 1.5. But that's what you measure. You measure 1. Then the catcher gets afraid and runs away from the ball. And that ball catches up to him. And he's running away at half the speed of light. So he's going this way, it's coming after him, but he's going half and half. So you know what's the speed it hits him? 1. Not a half, because 1 minus a half. It's totally illogical. But based on that, Einstein, nice Jewish boy, knew how, as was half the microcenter boarding experiment was Jewish, knew how to extrapolate beyond that to show this bizarre phenomenon of the world. It's the same with quantum physics. It wasn't by deduction, it was by observation.
But I thought Einstein didn't hold at the time of quantum physics.
No, I'm not talking about Einstein and quantum. Yeah, Einstein spent the last 2/3 of his life trying to dissuade what he introduced the idea of the quanta. That's what he gets his Nobel Prize for. That light comes in quantum. Einstein got his Nobel Prize for the beam of light that keeps the door of the elevator shutting on your foot. That's what he gets his Nobel Prize for.
But
for
he didn't
particle.
It seemed that he didn't accept. It was hard for him to accept an illogical universe.
Exactly what I'm saying. Even though he introduced this concept of quanta, he argued for the last 2/3 of his life that it can't be. I mean, the quanta were there, but that it can't be a slack. It can't be a probabilistic universe. It must be an exact universe, and that turned out to be not the case. Because it's getting late. A few minutes, just quickly on evolution. Okay, be careful of the word evolution. The words have meanings, okay? If I look in the text of the Bible, I see that the development of life is given about 6 sentences. Animal life. Animal life starts in the waters, moves to the land, becomes mammalian, becomes people. That's all the Torah says about it. It doesn't say what drove that flow. Animal life, it's verse 20 through verse 26 of Genesis chapter 1. Animal life starts in the waters, moves to the land, becomes mammal, becomes human. You know what? That's what the fossil record says also, in about 500,000 fossils. The Torah gives us 6 sentences. So the question is, what drove that development? Okay, so there are 2 words that you can use. You can use evolution, or just use evolution at the moment. Evolution has a meaning. Words have meanings. Now you can be sloppy and say, well, life evolved, when you may not mean that life evolved, okay? The meaning of evolution in its strict sense of the word, and the late Rosh Yeshiva of HaTorah, where I teach, Noah Weinberg, magnificent human being, says the first thing you have to do in a discussion is define your terms. What does the word evolution mean? Evolution is a theological statement. Evolution is a 2-stage process. Random mutations, with the emphasis on the word random, make that very clear. The strict meaning of evolution. Random mutations produce changes in the sex line, and then those random mutations may make the progeny, the offspring, smarter, dumber, faster, slower, stronger, weaker. And then the second half of evolution is 100% not random. Strong lions, the baby cubs that are born, some are going to be stronger because of the mutation, some will be weaker. So strong lions eat weak lions. The reason that there are not a lot of lions in the world isn't hunters. Lions eat lions. They don't have a problem. They're animals. So that aspect isn't random whatsoever. Fast cheetah get more food than slow cheetah. So the fast cheetah can have more kids because they got more food, etc., etc. So the second half of evolution is 100% not random. So people that argue with evolution will tell you, oh no, evolution isn't random. Look, strong lions. Everyone holds that strong lions eat weak lions. The difficulty is the first stage of evolution, which says random mutations in the genome make the changes. Now that's a problem, because if someday there'll be a clever enough lawyer to hear me babbling on this, or a kid or a student will have a father or mother that's a great lawyer, and they'll take it to the courts, and the word evolution will be stricken from the science classrooms in publicly funded schools. Because in America it's forbidden to teach theology in a school that gets public funding. And the word evolution is a theological statement. It says God is not active. It's a negative theological statement. That's theology. It says the mutations are random, And that's the meaning of the word evolution. Random mutations produce these changes, and then the changes take the fate in survival. The word development, however, is something different. Development is totally neutral. Development says from the fossil record and from the Torah, life started in the waters, moved to the land, becomes mammalian, becomes human. The word development doesn't say yes God or no God, or maybe God. It just says this is what happens. The Torah and the fossil record agree. The question is what drove that development. Was it evolution? Then that says it's a deist God that is not interested in the world, and the mutations are random. And that's a theological statement, which eventually someone's going to be clever enough to take it to the courts, because you can't teach theology in publicly funded schools. You can't. It's against the law, federal law. But it does teach theology, and people just accept that. And I don't want to get more into that. There's a whole, I could read you quite a few essays that or scientific reports that say random, and there's no evidence whatsoever. You will find no evolutionist that will be able to tell you with no equivocation that the mutations occurred randomly. The fact that it's not a straight line, that's completely acceptable with Torah. Even going out of Egypt, the people are sent this way, and the God says, "Shoo, go back, come that way." Even the trip wasn't, where God is leading the people is circuitous route. So the fact that the development of life isn't a straight line is not in any way contradictory to the way God runs the world. And so evolution, who knows if it ever happened. Development, I think for sure, I hope it happened, otherwise the Bible's wrong, and since nature, according to the Bible, after a few thousand years, science, that's good news. Anyway, that's what I would say that. I'm not going to go into some of the publications here, because it's too late. Yeah.
Doesn't the slit experiment prove randomness in the universe?
The double slit, there is randomness, that's the point. The point of what Einstein argued against is that the double slit doesn't prove randomness. It's the opposite. Double slit experiment and proves, in fact, that all aspects of the world know about the world, not just life. All aspects, including light beams and electrons, they know where to go. Double slit experiment tells you that the electrons or the light beams, whatever you're shooting through the slits, know whether there's an observer present, and they know where they're allowed to land or not allowed to land. I have a whole big discussion about the science of God. The double slit experiment shows that the world is aware of the world. It's bizarre, but that's not bizarre for the Torah. It's just bizarre for science. Yes.
The Rosh Yeshiva here has mentioned a few times that the he or the word he or could be referring to that's the energy, that's the bang. Is that something that you would?
I wouldn't say that unless I saw Chazal, and I don't use in all my works. I use zero modern commentary on the science, zero, trying to understand the Torah. Because everyone is always trying to bend the Bible to match the science, or bend the science to match the Bible. Right. But if I use the Ramban, and the Ramban tells me that the first thing, that the universe starts as a point smaller than a grain of mustard, and there's a reason for using the grain of mustard, there's logic, I don't want to get into that more, and that the stuff that was first wasn't solid at all, it was Dak Ma'od Ein Bo Mamash, that had no physicality, but then it became Mamash, it became solid. I think that's pretty clever for a person talking. Now, whether he got it right or wrong, we know that's what science says today. But I don't know where he was getting his information.
The Meforshim seem to struggle with if the sun and the moon are not created till later, then what's the or? So some say or shel Torah, but as far as reading it just in maybe there's another side to look at it that if you would read it and with the understanding of the Big Bang, that it was the or was energy. I mean that's for day number one. Yeah, but remember Rashi and the Ramban both say that Rashi and the Talmud both say that the sun was there before day 4. Just becomes visible, which geology would say exactly the same answer. But they're not explaining that the or on the first day was the sun.
No,
are they?
No. I don't know what to explain, but there are vast numbers of sources of light in the universe, other than stars, and that would be the big. We wouldn't see it as light. No one sees it as light until you have a brain. One thing is pretty crucial to realize: the universe is black. There's no light in the universe. It is completely black. There is no light. There's no sound in the universe. It is completely black. The only place there's light is in your brain. These radiations are not light out here, or the whole air would be glowing. That's what it would be. It's all inside the brain. There's no light out there. It's radiation. The fact is, when radiations between 400 and 700 nanometers long hit certain nerves here, they trigger a response that we interpret as light. But there's no light out here. The whole place would be glowing. It's not. I take a box of light air here. There's no light. How would I know that? Do an experiment. Okay? Experiment. Here's an experiment. How can I do this without making people get up? Okay. You look at me. Okay? Now, the image of you is streaming towards me. Okay? Now, you. What's your name again?
Ezra.
Ezra. Again. Okay, I want you to put your hands like this, so you can't see me, look in that direction, so you can't see either of the two of us. Can you see, what's your name?
Menachem.
Can you see Menachem?
No.
Can you see me?
No.
I can see your eyes, you surely can't see me. You can't see your eyes. Okay, can you see me? Come on. Okay? So you can't see, no, keep doing it. So you can't see Menachem, you can't see me, huh? But his images are streaming towards me, so why can't you see them? His image is right here and here and here and here and here. Otherwise it wouldn't get to my eyes. But the fact is, it's nothing till it gets into your brain. That's the reality. There's no light in the universe. It's pitch black. But our brains are constructed to see certain radiations as light. But never confuse yourself that there's actual light. There are light beams outside, but they're called light beams only because of what happens inside your brain. In this room, there are probably 10,000 radio messages going on right now. It's the identical radiation that makes light. It's just a different wavelength. The wavelengths of light are, you can't even get your fingers close enough. They're in billionths of a meter. The wavelengths that carry the radio waves are this long. That's why they don't cause cancer. They're a bit longer than the waves in your microwave, which also doesn't cause cancer, because the wave is so long it can't interact with the DNA, which is what makes cancer. The DNA goes berserk. That's why they're safe. That's why you're allowed to have them. Otherwise, you couldn't have a cell phone, which is emitting, just measuring radiation from your cell phone. If you have an old phone like mine, it's like 40 times what you'd expect from an antenna. If you have a new, like a smartphone, it's like 4 times. 4 times. You realize it's more. All it can do is warm you a bit, because that's how it works in the microwave. But it doesn't, what am I getting at? I'm just saying, all this stuff is the same. It's just that some waves are this long, the radio waves are this long, and the microwaves are this long, and they're all this room. Why do we see them? Because we're not tuned for that. We're tuned for wavelengths of a few 400 nanometers, 500 nanometers, billions of them, 10 to the minus 9th meter. I mean, they're short. Those can interact with DNA. That's how they give you cancer. Anyway, okay, I think we're going to end it here, but let me just 30 seconds on the age of the universe. If you have a question on the age of the universe, please. I'm not selling books because I'm not selling books, but you get it for free. If you go to my website, GeraldSchroeder.com, or take a card, go to my website. There's an article on there which summarizes in 5 pages what 2 chapters of the science of God talks about on 2 chapters in here on the age of the universe. And it talks about the key of the age of the universe, billions of years, is that when we say the universe is 14 billion years old, the other half of the sentence is as measured from the time-space coordinates of the Earth, or in English, as measured from our position in the universe today. Go anywhere else in the universe, make that measurement, you get a different number. There are two perceptions of time. Days 0 to Adam, the 6 days, which describe time from a biblical point of view, and then from Adam forward, which describes time from an earth-based point of view. From Adam forward, all the passages of time are earth-based. Adam and Eve live 130 years of a kid named Seth. Seth lives 105 years of a kid named Enosh. From Adam forward, all passage of time is earth-based, human-based, earth-based. But the first 6 days are totally abstract. The Ramban brings down the point of perception from the biblical point of view of the first 6 days, based on the fact that the day says Yom Echad Binkom Yom Rishon. Day 1 instead of, not Rashi has his take on it, the Ramban didn't take on it altogether. That the view from time for the Torah for the 6 days is the beginning looking forward. We look back. The calculation I bring down in the text matches. It's had such a stamp of approval that it put this book. I'm not bragging, but I'm going to tell you. It's worth looking up the essay. It put this book on the bestseller list for an entire year. You don't last on the bestseller list for an entire year. And in the field of science, it was number one. Stephen Hawking, Brian Greene, Richard Dawkins, etc., etc. This was number one for the year it came out, against all others on Amazon, which Amazon sells books. So it's not bragging, because the royalties did that just fine. But it does tell you that there's a reality to this world. The world is 14 billion years old, as we measure. The world is the 57, 74 years back to Adam, and then before that, etc. If it bothers you about the age of the universe, if it bothers you about not my socks, wash. My wife got me these socks and the shirt. Everything else I'm wearing also. Barbara Silver. But she got me this also. It's an eben, but it's a mi'uban. Mi'uban means, what does the word eben mean?
Stone.
Hear the word eben inside mi'uban? Mi'uban, something made into an eben that wasn't an eben. It was once a bone. It's the vertebra of Plesiosaurus, a water-dwelling dinosaur. It's 150 million years old. The calendar only goes back to 5774. But lucky for us, the calendar begins with what event?
Or said after.
Adam. It begins with Adam. Adam, yeah. And those 6 days before, Rashi says they're 24 hours each, the Ramban, the Kabbalah says 24 hours each, and the Talmud in Chagiga says they're 24 hours each, but it's a different perception of time. The days weren't long periods of time. They were Kaf Dalet Sha'ot. It's the easiest Rashi in all of Shas. Yom Kaf Dalet Sha'ot, 24 hours. But the perception is not the perception that we have of time. It's the biblical perception. In fact, it is the Ramban who says Kaf Dalet Sha'ot also, 24 hours, brings down that the Torah sees these days, these 24-hour days, from the beginning looking forward. And that's the whole answer. And if you go to those essays, you will see the answer. The Science of God has it in much more detail. But anyway, so the universe is young, and the universe is old, and they happen simultaneously. Yeah, that's it. Okay, well, two questions.
How do you explain that they think that they're humans around for 100,000 to 200,000?
That's not a problem. Adam wasn't the first Homo sapiens sapient. Maimonides talks about the Guide for the Perplexed, part 1, chapter 7, that Adam even had sex with these beings. Adam was split for 130 years, you have to realize. These beings had the same shape and the same intelligence as humans, but they weren't human. They lacked verse 27, the neshama. They were verse 26 Adams, not Adam. But in verse 27, God creates et ha'adam. God doesn't create Adam in verse 27. Et ha'adam. Thank you, Peggy Ketz of Hawaii, for pointing it out to me. God creates the Adam. And the neshama goes into one of those beings, and according to the Ramban, ne'afach le'ish acher. You speak Hebrew? Okay. Anyone speak Hebrew? Yeah, of course you speak.
He was changed into a man.
No. That's not what he says.
A different man.
A
different man.
A different man, which means before the neshama there was man, it just wasn't human.
Yeah.
It's crucial that he doesn't say nefach le'ish. Nefach le'ish acher. It's a crucial statement. There was ish before that. They invented farming 10,000 years ago. In Kilayim, everyone guessed. I think it's in Kilayim. Adnei hasidech chayot. Straight statement. The masters of the field are animals. It's a straight statement. There's no debate. Well, what kind of profession masters the field? A farmer. The masters, adnei hasidot chayot. These masters of the field are animals. Straight statement. Then what's the debate with Rabbi Yossi? You have to bury them like a dead human because you can't tell them apart from a dead human. Now, where did these guys? We're talking about 1,800 years ago. It wasn't because someone was digging up the fossils. They better write this in the brain. Where did they get the idea of cavemen that were identical to humans before they were humans? It's in the text, for which we don't have time this evening. They weren't people; they were animals. But when you go to a museum or you go to an anthropology textbook and you see pictures in the museum of people sitting around a campfire inventing farming 10,000 years ago, inventing tools 50,000 years ago, the museum is 100% correct by its definition of a person. The museum's definition of a person, the anthropologist's definition of a person, is a being that looks like you and looks like me, has your brains and my brains. And they're correct. But the Bible's definition of a human, of a person, is a being that looks like you and looks like me, has your brains and my brains, and also has a neshama. That's the difference. the neshama changed the world. In the Science of God, I bring down the British Museum dates a change in society that is so extreme that they have an entire wing, not a room, a wing dedicated to the things that happened. Guess when? They don't mention God, they don't mention Adam, they don't mention the Bible, but they date it. 5,500 years ago, right after Adam, society changed. I called it the Creator. What made it happen? We have no idea. But society changed, and it's so significant that this museum in the center of London, it's pretty expensive property, has an entire wing dedicated to the change in society that occurs immediately after the neshama is injected. Writing, cities, trading, the list goes on and on. And you know what? There's no explanation. But the Bible has an explanation. The neshama changed the world. Before the neshama, it was literally dog eat dog. If you didn't look like me, steal off my property or I had you for dinner. Literally. These weren't people. They were animals. But with all, as my mind says, very dangerous because they have the skills of a human, or the intelligence of a human, and all the drives of an animal. It's hard to believe it. You just, the part 1, chapter 7, the guide for the perplexed, get it annotated, and you'll see where the sources are in the Talmud.
Sounds almost like trespassing in Texas, but that's beside the point.
Sounds like what?
Trespassing in Texas, you can get shot.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but beside that,
excuse me.
One short statement and then a question. The statement is that, interestingly enough, in Greek, ancient and modern, the word for man is atom, which is what we use for an atom.
Interesting.
Okay? And the question is, when did the concept of 24 hours in a day start?
You mean historically, like how many millions of years ago, or in
in modern, modern society. I mean, in Homo sapiens, since Adam, when in Judaism, when
when they call it 24 hours, the Talmud calls it Rashi calls it kaf dal shot.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't know if you break, but the idea of that cycle is circadian. It's built into our genes.
Well, but it could be 20 hours. It could be 40 hours.
Yeah, exactly. When was it divided to 25? I don't have any idea.
Okay.
I have not a clue. Yeah.
What would you say happened to the men without neshamas?
Or the women also.
Or the women.
The being. Well, see, I read the newspapers from the area, and I get the feel that they might still be around. Okay. On the other hand, I had a student. This goes back at least maybe 15 years ago in Baltimore, Maryland. It was an early morning class, and he was clever. He was a high school student. He said they would probably breed themselves out of existence. Just why aren't there a lot of lions? Because lions can't stand other lions. Got the alpha lion doesn't want any of the other male lions around. These people are so bellicose they probably could kill each other off. That's what I would guess. On the other hand, maybe they're still around. I don't like to say it, but you look at how the world acts sometimes. It's getting really late, yes.
Can the world exist without God now?
Can the world exist? I don't think so.
So
Although terrible things can happen when you kick God out. That's what Billy Graham's daughter. Billy Graham used to be called the God's traveling salesman. He's a Christian. And there was a big shooting. I think it was in Columbine. It was one of the cities where a person in high school or grade school and kills 15 or 20 people.
In Colorado.
And what?
Colorado.
Where was it? Was that? But I don't know if it was Columbine. But it was anyway. So I think it was one of the. In any event, so the newspaper reporter, like to get the little dig in, the little dig that I like to give anyone that hasn't. So asked Billy Graham's daughter. She pretty much from that area. Well, what do you think about that? Why did God let this happen? And her answer was perfect. We've kicked God out of the classroom. And that's what happens. Her answer was absolutely perfect. You can't talk about God in the classrooms. You don't want God in the classrooms? That's what you get. So, what was your question?
If theoretically God would cease to exist, would the world still exist?
It wouldn't. The world is in Hamakom, the universe. The world is within. If you want to say within God, I don't know how to say it. Hamakom, the place of the universe is God. One of the names for God in the Torah, in fact, is Hamakom. Oh, we just read it with the ladders.
The Rambam clearly.
Are you asking?
The Rambam clearly states the case, and the Rambam clearly states the case. I'm sure that they the universe. If God ceased to exist, the universe needs God to exist. He is the Kadmon. Its kiyum is based on the existence of God.
Yeah, because that's what brings in.
Yeah, but do the scientists nowadays who agree that there's a God particle or a God factor, would they agree that you don't? Would they agree that now God created the world, they agree with that. Okay, fine. But now you take God out of the picture, would the world just continue to run through the laws of nature?
Well, that's what they're relating God as the laws of nature. They're saying this is God. These forces.
But they agree that it would only, it's for life to have come on Earth.
Look,
if it's not Dawkins, the other ones, Dawkins would say that, but modern ones who you agreed or who you started the presentation saying that they agree that there's something called God.
See, I guess the best quote would be from Bernard Carr, the cosmologist in London. If you don't want God, you better have a multi-universe. In other words, you need God to get life going. It doesn't make sense other than that. But there's no statistics as you say this guy written. Never says never. You know.
And just out of curiosity, how do you understand? There are a lot of back and forth quotes that from Einstein, whether or not he did believe that there was a God.
Okay, so Barbara Sofer, great writer, look up Barbara Sofer every 2 weeks, and Houston Post, phenomenal. Also spokesperson for Deism. Anyway, Barbara was researching a story, so she met with the first mayor of Jerusalem, Teddy Kollek. Teddy Kollek was the chief of staff for David Ben-Gurion. Right, the person that travels with the chief of staff in America also. Not military, not the military.
They run the government.
What?
They run the government.
Yeah, we had an experience of that this past summer. It's amazing. But then, so they're traveling and they're driving. Here's the story. You're getting it third hand. My wife got it from Teddy Kollek, who was present at the time, but I got it from my wife. And you're getting it from me. So there's picture that gets fuzzy. But here's how I understand it. They were driving from Washington to New York to the UN. Ben-Gurion and Kollek were driving, not flying, interesting. They were 2 hours ahead of schedule. They're passing Princeton, and David Ben-Gurion said, I'd like to meet Albert Einstein. It's the one time I understood they have a face-to-face meeting. They go into the meeting, they meet, and the discussion that took place, according to now Teddy Kollek didn't do this from memory. He has, I presume they're archived now. He has all these notes, and he kept all the notes. The discussion was totally not about weapons. You could think it might, nuclear stuff, etc. It was totally about whether there's evidence in the world for some divine force, some outside force acting in the world. And according to Mayor Kollek's notes that he read to Barbara, and Barbara told me, and I'm telling you, okay, so they both agreed that there's no way of explaining how the world has been working, and it's primarily the social world. That there's no way of explaining how the world works except for the fact that there's an outside force, we would call it God, an outside force active in the world. So that was Einstein and David Ben-Gurion. So I would say Einstein did realize there are other forces in the world, maybe we would call that God. Maybe, just we depend on what that force wanted from you. You might have not have thought that.
Because there's a famous quote about God doesn't play dice with the universe.
Yeah.
But then other people quoted that he said other things that there is no such thing as or something along those lines. So I know there's a conflict.
Okay. Yeah. Einstein was correct that God doesn't play. Here's how I understand. Here's my understanding. Here's my take. Yeah. Here's my take on that. Einstein is correct. God doesn't play dice with the universe, but God lets the universe play dice. That's my understanding of what this means. God doesn't play dice with the universe. God doesn't make this happen. But God set up the universe so the universe can play dice. It's called Tzimtzum, Hester Panim, that God pulls back and lets the system run, and it steps in from time to time and slaps it around. Maybe God let the system happen that brought on the Holocaust. Who knows why the bomb didn't kill Hitler? Did God make that happen? I would hope that it just happened, that someone moved it, but he did. If you look at Hitler's history, he was a runner in the First World War. I think most of his siblings actually died. So I don't know. See, I don't know. So anyway, good to everyone. What were you doing now?
Thank you very much.